to the Recovery Act prior to the crash, we knew there was a major problem then. There was a huge problem then. That problem is by 2030, if we have some conservative revenue projections, we're not going to be able to do anything other than pay for Social Security, Medicaid, and interest. And that means all other spending is going to have to go on debt. There's just no room in the budget for it. And something had to have been done. And we knew this, back in the 70s, but it's a long way away. Back in the 80s, it seemed a long way away. In the 90s, we still had a decade to worry about it. And then the baby boomers started to retire. Now we have problems. And then it got particularly worse. So let's bring it up to speed on the latest where we are. Since 2008, we've had some major challenges. And that is, of course, you can see some of the slide. These are our deficit numbers up to last year. Bang, $1.7 trillion off the charts. But the problem is how this translates to the national debt. The national debt's running up to near $13 trillion. And if you're an economist, your real concern is not the numbers, but relative to percentage of GDP. So we're looking at levels that haven't been seen since World War II. And given that we are relying on debt, our creditors are pretty concerned about this. So we will not be able to increase or go anywhere beyond the 2011 investment unless some of these issues are addressed. And this is a major concern for Congress. On the next slide, I'll look at the latest report from the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, on the budget and economic outlook. And they confirm this. And I think they take some of the rough edges around it, sand it, and make it a little more appealable. But clearly, the deficit is the highest it's been since World War II, as is the debt. And if you go to the next slide and look at the second bullet, and that says, putting the nation on sustainable fiscal course will require some combination of lower spending, higher revenues than what's now projected. Which is to say, we are on an unsustainable path. And we are in serious problems. And our credit worthiness is in real question. As a result, our creditors are asking some serious questions. For example, and this didn't get a lot of news, look at slide 12. This is already happening. Unfortunately, this is cut off. But on July 28th, the United States and China met for some strategic economic dialogue. It didn't get much press, but it should have got a lot more press. And that's because if you look at the bullet, and that is on your screen and on your slide, there was a commitment by the United States that by 2013, it's going to reform its healthcare system and control rising healthcare costs for business and government, thus reducing the budget deficit relative to GDP by 2013. 2013 is not a long way off. This is a major challenge. And it's interesting because I have friends who work in the banking industry in Hong Kong and work with China. And the discussion there is a high level of discussion what's going on with the US deficit and debt. I don't see it as much here. But when you work on that side, when you look at our loaners, they are seriously concerned about this issue. And if they begin to invest less United States in the Treasury bills, more into their internal infrastructure, then we're in real trouble. Then our creditworthiness continues to dive, and then what happens after 2011 becomes a little bit troublesome. Of course, it's not like there was no reason to do this, no reason for this major investment in the Recovery Act. It had to have been done. And a lot of the reason this is accelerating is because of the Recovery Act. But this was necessary. And how does this compare to prior recessions? If we look at this chart, we see that it is much longer, it is deeper, it is more severe. At least 48 states face shortfalls in FY 2010. That's about 24% of state budgets, totaling about $165 billion in deficit. Next year, this is projected to get much larger. So at least currently, 33 states already anticipate deficits for 2011. And that's going to be shortfalls up to $180 billion for the states. So something really had to have been done about it. And it's going to take some time to shake this out. Things clearly are not fiscally rosy. So there are some challenges here, and which is why, and if you look at slide 14, does anyone recognize this guy? Know who he is? There's no way actually you should. But once I say the name, you'll realize that this was probably the most influential man in our government today. And this is 64 years after his death. John Maynard Keynes is finally having his ideas tested. And that is, the federal government is the investor of last resort when state and localities can no longer do so because they cannot run a deficit. And that is, this investment must be massive, and this investment must be done to stave off any recession, to stave off any depression. So this is, Keynesian economics is again on the rise, and the ARRA is a clear illustration, the real test of this theory to see if this will actually pan out. John Maynard Keynes is certainly an influential figure these days. But this is not just an economic matter. If you think about the second slide, talk about not allowing a crisis go to waste. And so the administration is leveraging some key education reforms attached to these dollars. It's a quid pro quo, and it causes a very strenuous duality in this law, which if you're working with this law, you recognize that the economic incentives are not necessarily tied to the education program incentives. It is really just dovetailing off the economic principle of this law. But in order to help stabilize the budgets, the trade-off is the promotion of the 4 core education reform areas. And that's achieving equity in highly qualified teacher distribution, and effective teachers and principals, I'll add, improving collection and use of data, enhancing the quality of standards and assessments, and supporting struggling schools. So this is the quid pro quo that the administration would like to see out of this. And I think it's important to recognize that this is tough to do. There's a real tension here. And if you look at this slide, you know, the design of this law is almost, it's crazy. It kind of begs them what they were thinking. And it kind of reminds me of this chariot. You really can't have one or the other. Balancing both is going to be a very difficult task. And so when you're looking at the money that you have available and how they want you to spend it, recognize that there is tension here because primarily this is an economic law. And you're dovetailing major education reform on this. Also recognize, because of all the information we just talked about, there's really no second chance here. If we don't get this one right, the stakes are high. There is no second stimulus. And it's going to be a major political issue, obviously, in the upcoming elections. So this is going to be a tough one. This chair is going to rock back and forth. And one of your responsibilities and one of your duties is to figure out how to balance this successfully. Not going to be easily done. So let me provide, and the slide you had before you should be, I think, slide 17, is an overview of the Recovery Act. So what I did was provide a graphical form divided into a general organization chart into 3 categories that begins to organize this, to put it in a single place. You'll see that there are 3 major areas: stabilization fund, the formula increase, and the competitive increases. Stabilization fund made up of 2 pieces: the formula funds, and that's largely your state fiscal stabilization funds. That's to shore up state and local revenue shortfall. And then you can follow the other arrow down, that's the competitive. And this is where the Department of Education is really getting some leverage to drive some of this change, using the Race to the Top funds, historic $4.3 billion investment. In addition, the LEA equivalent of the Race to the Top, which is the What Works and Innovation Fund. Authorized uses for stabilization funds you see captured in this yellow bubble here, and that is for activities authorized under ESEA, IDEA, AFLA, Perkins, and the real magic there is in Title VIII under ESEA, which allows you to drive funds into impact aid programs and use them as state and local funds so you can restore your state and local revenue shortfalls. When this law first came out, it was some real questions on how are you planning to stabilize state and local revenue shortfalls with programs that are based on supplementing, not supplanting. How would that be done? The magic is in Title VIII. That's the loophole they created, and a creative read on this in order to be able to do that. Also, your formula increases. In this category, you're looking at basically doubling what you get on an annual basis. And on the chart, just to explain it for you, you'll see the program listed, the amount available, and then I put down what are the distribution dates for each. So for Title I, it said April 1st, 50%, and then September 1st, you got the second 50%. So that's what those numbers that's what they identify. I do want to bring your attention to the school improvement grant.